Welcome to the Strategic Motivator Show, where we're motivating the world's leaders to be more strategic in their business and professional, personal lives. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we have a very special guest who's going to talk to us about transforming cultures in organizations. Our special guest is Chris Armstrong. Chris is the co-founder of Veritas Culture, and he's also a certified diversity executive and a certified master facilitator. He is frequently requested to work issues in the areas of culture, crisis, culture assessment, and diversity and inclusion. Prior to this, Chris has been the culture executive at two major intelligence federal organizations. Chris, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So, Chris, let's get right into it. What makes you an expert in culture?
I think it's anything but what people would expect. So it's not because of academics, although I certainly have the certifications. I think it's for two reasons, maybe. One is experience with the collective. So culture being collective regard. I was a senior executive in the intelligence committee for a while, 12 years, but in no time during that tenure did I see myself as an executive in the sense of who I sort of hung with or who I would see myself as attached to or aligned to. So I was always with the collective. I always had a good relationship with the collective. It was very intentional. So being able to be with the collective, understanding their concerns and issues, but also being attached, obviously, to my to the senior core, being a senior myself, I was able to bridge both sides, but really be the bridge between the executives and the workforce. And I was frequently asked to do that. And I think the second would be genuine curiosity. So I have a genuine interest in the human condition. So when I hear about culture issues, or when I read about culture things that are going on, the first thing I know not to do is to judge or to make assumptions. I always bring in genuine curiosity and listen to understand so that I can see the culture for what it is, not what my internal biases, which we all have, might tell me it is.
So this is extremely interesting because you obviously you didn't start as an executive, but as you were starting in the workforce, can you tell us a little bit more about your trajectory from getting to the executive ranks and why culture ended up being so important?
So I think in all candidness, my trajectory was too quick. I came into the government as a contractor and within 6 months was hired as a 14 at the age of 26. I was a 15 at the age of 28 and I was an SCS at the age of 30. That sounds great. In neither case was I ready. But what I was always ready for was being the bridge. And I think that's why I was promoted, because I was the person who was able to bring people together. And I think the reason I ended up ultimately getting into culture was that although I struggled a little bit with what I cared to do, I mean, I worked in an IT shop, I worked in a policy shop, I worked human resources. The thing I always loved was interactions and engagements, and more importantly, trying to figure out how to make them easier for people. So I was always the person that was asked to do pay for performance because it was congressionally mandated, but the workforce hated it. So who are you going to ask to bring the workforce along? Ask Chris. I was the first Caucasian diversity executive at my agency. Why is that? Not because I had diversity and inclusion background at the time, I do now, but because of my relationship with the workforce. So I got into culture because I could see perhaps what the issues were from different lenses in a way that maybe not everyone could. And I frankly didn't want to keep seeing the organization go in circles.
Very good. Very good. So let's talk a little bit. Let's step back a little bit. Let's define culture, what culture really is, because I think there are so many things that people may think culture is, right? They may think you can restructure and change your culture. They may think that culture is really necessitated by whatever the mission is, or they may think that leaders are the only one who drive culture. You've talked today about how important it is to stay in lockstep with that workforce. So define culture and then talk to the leaders who are listening and talk to them about how you do that. How is that even a possible thing to lead, get results, and then also stay in lockstep with the workforce?
So I guess I would start by saying that culture is collective regard. And it's in every dictionary. You'll look up on the word culture. Even when we ask people to define culture, they'll say, oh, how we behave, our norms. And they're right. It's a group. It's not one or two people. And obviously, in any organization, there's more non-supervisors than there are supervisors, which means the non-supervisory workforce is always the majority of the culture. And I'll answer your question, I guess, by just giving a very high-level example. When I was made the culture executive at NGA, it was because of a Washington Post article that came out.
Interesting.
In a pretty significant issue. And prior to me coming on board, the organization had seen 4 years of decline, survey decline, increases in complaints, things that are very objective. And within 6 months of me being there, there was a town hall because the workforce started seeing differences already.
Interesting.
So I get asked to host this town hall, and that's why I'm not going to host it. I'll facilitate it. The people who are going to host it are going to be the workforce who actually did all of this. And somebody in the audience asked one of the panel members, all the panel members were of all grade levels, asked him, why do you think this effort's so much different? And the way that the panel member answered it was, it's no longer being done to us, it's being done with us. What I did from the moment that I was there was developed people to be culture facilitators. I never made it about me, and that's authentic. Like it wasn't just an act. It was, how many times can I tell somebody, I don't know your culture the way your workforce knows your culture. You want to bring me in because I'm an executive and I'm calm and whatever. I'm still not going to be able to define what your workforce goes through every single day. They can define it. Yeah, but they're rowdy. Yeah, they could sometimes be rowdy. Are you willing to see through that? Are you willing to understand why they might feel the way they feel? But the reverse is also true. If leaders have authentic intent, but the workforce just doesn't trust them, they've got to do something about that. So my job is to bring both sides together, and I facilitate with the leadership in one part and then with the workforce in another, and then I bring them together.
So why is it important to do that? Why, I think a lot of people will say, if my leader cared about me, or if our leaders cared about the workforce, that they would change things, that something would be different. And it's all about just them. So why is it important for you? Do you find it's important to have those dual sessions separately and then bring them together?
So I think we have to acknowledge some of the root issues to culture. One of them is fear-driven behavior. So if I acknowledge that the non-supervisors are fearful and so are the supervisors, I have to also acknowledge that if I want to initially get what's at the heart of their issues, they're not going to say it with other people in the room. Supervisors are afraid that if they get real, there'll be a lawsuit. The workforce is afraid that if they get real, there'll be repercussions and retaliation. So let me collect both sides first. While I'm collecting them, facilitate. That's the important thing, because somebody putting something out there doesn't make it true. It means it's their thoughts, but they're uninformed. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just easy for somebody to say something like, it's the 6th floor. Well, there's 190 people on the 6th floor. Who are you really referring to? Or it's easy for someone in the leadership to say, well, the workforce just doesn't like change. So who's the workforce, number one, and what change are you referring to? So once I can distill down from what I call uninformed expression to informed expression, then they're off the ledge. And then I bring them together, because what I tell them is, at the end of the day, my job is to deliver an assessment to the director. Guess who's going to brief it to the director? Not me.
Wow. So you have the workforce brief it. That's awesome. So I understand that would be great. And there are some very brave folks in the organization who would feel very comfortable doing that, right? But one of the main culprits of culture is fear, right? We've got leaders who are afraid that if their workforce, if their subordinates call them out on something, that it could lead to litigation, right? And you talked about what happened to you at NGA, but there are lots of people in the news right now, and I'm sure Veritas is helping many people, corporations as well, deal with this. But what are those fears that the workforce has, and what are those fears that leaders have? And how do we bridge the gap to get from fear to actually a level playing field, a common place where we can just have the discussion?
So I would say that the three biggest fears that the non-supervisory workforce has, number one is retaliation. If I say something, I'm going to be moved, I'm going to be fired, I'm not going to get that promotion even though I'm deserving. The second fear they have is loss of peers. So I'm in a room full of people. Even if I don't believe my leadership's going to do something, I might be talking about something my leadership didn't even do, but someone in the room knows somebody who did it.
Right.
And so relatedness is one of the most important things to humans. I'm going to lose some of that relatedness. And I think the third thing that the workforce, the non-supervisory workforce fears is, and this is going to sound crazy, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's water, electric, a house, a roof over their heads. We tell ourselves stories that if that peer does something or if that supervisor does something, this isn't just about whether I get moved to another position. This is about my livelihood. This is about whether I can feed my kids. And that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, it's the very first one. It's even Chris. I mean, there's lots of psychology and physiology and psychiatry around that. On the leadership side, it's really two things. One, litigation. I'm going to get sued. The second is the court of public opinion. So the court of public opinion has become more powerful in this day and age than any courts, because it no longer matters whether or not you did anything wrong at any level, but it's more directed toward leaders. It just matters whether people have heard that you did something wrong, and the quick opinions that they form, and that frankly they don't let go of. It's like telling a jury to disregard evidence; they don't.
Right.
So yeah.
All right. This is really good, and it's really good for leaders. And one of the things that I just want our audience to know is we are skimming the surface. Chris has done a master class for us for the Strategic Motivator members. So if you are a member, you are going to be able to go to the dashboard right now. If you are not a member, you want to go to strategicmotivator.com and go to /membership. And we are going to be able to get you the opportunity to have this master class. Now, one of the things that will come along with that is we're all going to be able to watch it or have access to it as a group. And then we can do some coaching around that. And we will be able to give you some tips and some keys from his master class and see if you can start to implement them. So I want to ask you a question really quick, though, Chris, because, the fear is real. To be honest, there are people who are getting leaders who not only are they facing litigation, those hierarchy of needs that you talked about kind of on the workforce side. Well, if I get some Twitter backlash, I may be facing those same things, right? I may have to move. I may have to step back. I may have to resign. How do you overcome those fears? I mean, how do you really create a culture where a discussion can be had? How do you create a culture where it's okay to do something wrong? Because guess what? We all do things wrong as we're learning. So how does that work in reality? How are you able to come in and make a culture transform into an organization that is open and effective?
I think there's really only three things to do. I mean, none of it's training, none of it's town halls and sort of the usual suspects, if you will. I think the first one is we have to be willing to, and this is going to sound hokey, we have to be willing to listen to understand. And what I mean by that is part of my success has been to be able to get into large groups and not just me facilitate, but them hearing themselves through the facilitation. If I
Okay.
fear litigation or if I fear retaliation, it's not generally specific fear. It's generally institutional fear. But someone has to help me realize you're taking a specific situation, which probably was in fact true, but you've broadened it to this entire group of people. And until I can get you to see that that's maybe something that you've done, but in a way that's non-condescending and non-dictatorial, like my job isn't to do a gotcha. It's not to tell you how dumb you are. It's to basically say, you're going through some things. I want to help you see the difference between this big picture, broad picture you've painted and what's really going on. And frankly, once we find out what's really going on, let's nip it in the bud. Because one of the things about toxic culture or this perception that everybody's bad is we don't actually focus on the people that are bad. If I can get you to change your story from everything and everyone and all the time to these people and here's some specifics, I will fight for you all day, every day. So that's number one, informed expression, get people to talk so we can inform what's actually going on. The second is literally develop the workforce to be change agents. And I don't mean just, can you volunteer to be a change agent? Put them through the training, put them through something that helps them understand what uninformed expression is. What's the difference between a symptom and a root cause? But then once you do that, let go, empower them. Don't worry about mistakes they might make. Don't worry about whether they're going to be perfect. Don't worry about whether they're a certified master facilitator. Who cares? You get that through experience, quite frankly. I didn't get it through a class. And then the third thing, and I got to just sort of focus on this, is throw out every single solution that you have put forward ever, even if it's, you're looking to do it in the future, unless it's a root solution. And here's why. Because the thing that a good culture change effort is going to face resistance against 10 out of 10 times is fatigue.
Absolutely.
So, and the workforce has a right to be fatigued. So if you can say to yourself, I'm going to move them to informed expression. I'm going to develop them to be change agents who can do the same thing. That becomes a multiplier effect, by the way. And I'm going to take everything off the table that doesn't deal with the root issue or that doesn't deal with the root issue. Then what I'm going to do is I'm only going to spend time and have them spend time on things that actually matters. And then we'll have more culture champions and less culture vultures. And frankly, less culture sculptors. And most people in the workforce are either sculptors or vultures. They're not champions.
All right. So my mind is being blown here. This is, I'm sure, a lot for me, but also for our audience. So I'm going to have you define some things. Culture vulture, culture sculpture. Can you define those for us? And also, you talked about root solution. Tell me what you mean by that.
So very quickly, there's three types of people. One is a culture champion. They're the people that are leaning in all the time. They assume positive intent. They're not naive, but they don't automatically make an assumption that just because something isn't what they wanted it to be, that there's some ill intent behind it. They try to turn negative messaging into positive messaging. They try to they practice peer accountability. That's about 9% of any given workforce. Culture vultures are the toxic people. They're opportunistic. They like when the culture's bad because they relish off of it. Pit people against people, see a bad thing think about what a vulture does. They go in and prey and then they eat the scraps. They're about 6% of any workforce. The problem is even though they're less, they tend to be louder than champions because they want to get their point across. And then 84%, the rest of your workforce, 85, I guess, percent is, or 84%, are culture sculptors. And if you think about a sculptor, what does a sculptor do? They sit there. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but most people don't get involved.
Interesting.
They don't want to get involved. Most people just want to come to work, do their job. You want me to go to what town hall? Look, I got to get off at 3:30. My kids are, and that's not a bad thing, except when they don't like something but don't want to be a part in its solution. So if you're going to be the person, which is most people, if you're going to be the person that says, just let me do my work, let me stay at my cube, then you're going to get the rewards of staying in your cube, which is you don't get involved in anything. We're not necessarily going to see you as a champion. We're not necessarily going to see you as a progressive person who's going to help cure the culture. These are the people who fill out surveys and it's just sort of very vanilla. There's no comment section because I don't really want to get involved.
Right.
They're bystanders. They see an event happening. They know somebody's doing something wrong or saying something wrong, and they're like, don't get me involved. Most people are sculptors.
Don't want to, yes. Okay, great. Well, I would like for you to talk a little bit more to our audience as we're starting to wrap up. Tell me the benefits of culture, because I think there are people who want to get involved, but they are afraid. They are afraid of retaliation. They are afraid of litigation. So what are the benefits of really transforming a culture in a positive way?
So I think one is to stop the noise. So right now, again, most cultures aren't toxic, but there's still noise. So the noise level is such as though it is toxic. And even if leaders know it's not toxic, even if individuals know it's not toxic, because they're not doing anything or getting involved, as you say, the noise is still there. And in fact, the longer you do nothing, the more the noise will grow. So sometimes it's just stop the noise. Sometimes the reason you want to transform the culture, quite frankly, is so that you can get more people on that champion side and you can actually literally improve the performance of your company. Harvard does year after year that talks about how many employees are disengaged. It's true. Most
Gallup does as well. Yeah.
Right. So do you want more engaged employees? Then improve the culture. And improving it isn't this wholesale change. Again, most cultures aren't toxic. It's let's find the few things that are wrong. Let's fix them. And then let's keep our employees focused on the things that are right. Let's keep more people in the organization instead of having them leave. There's another benefit, turnover and attrition.
Yes, attrition. Definitely a main cause. Well, thank you so much. The thing I'd like to just have you end with before we get to our quick strategy round, I don't know if you're ready for that, but before we do that, can you just give us in a nutshell, a case study where maybe you have either facilitated a change in an organization, just for people to really understand what that is, what it's like, and why we need you to help us have some change agents in our midst, why we need to bring someone in, not to necessarily, again, like you said, for them to just come in and be the expert, go in, go out, and everything stays the same, but to really come in and treat some change agents. Can you talk to me about maybe a case study somewhere where you were very successful?
So, particular organization that after I left, one year while I was there, and then after I left, 5 straight years of survey increases and formal complaint decreases. I did 4 things and I'll be very quick about them. The first thing I did was what we call a strategic source review. That's just where I'm looking at all the static data. Show me your demographics, show me your policies and procedures, show me your survey trends, show me your complaint trends. That just gives me an idea of what the culture is, but that's a very narrow lens. The second is I do the culture sessions. That's where I facilitate the dialogue with 20% of the workforce. And it's facilitation. It's not me talking at them, and it's not a pulse session, but I'm really getting to the heart of what the issues are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare what they're telling me during the sessions versus what I read in those documents. Now I've got a clearer picture of the culture. The third thing I did was developed change agents. But here's the funny thing. Most of the change agents volunteered themselves as a result of the culture sessions.
Awesome.
They like how they're run. They don't feel like I'm talking at them or to them. I'm talking with them, bringing people along. And they self-identify. So then what happens is step 4 is we develop the assessment. But guess who the we is? Me and those people. And the best part about it was the town hall that they asked for at the very beginning, they ended up facilitating. So at the very beginning, you do a culture session. The first thing they ask you is, where is this going to go? And it's skepticism, which is understandable, quite frankly. So I tell them, first and foremost, there'll be a town hall. You'll get a copy of the assessment, and it won't be a sugar-coated copy, and they always do. And B, there'll be a town hall, and I won't be facilitating. It'll be one of you. And they look at me like crooked-eyed. But at the end, they're like, okay, I see what you're doing. And they end up facilitating. And then what happens is I step back. It doesn't mean I don't help, but I coach or I lean in and I do little things as they're becoming they can do it themselves, because if they become reliant on me, I'll be coming in every single year and it won't actually help the collective, and they'll become over-reliant. So even this particular organization, I haven't been on there full time for 3 years now, but I go in twice a year. And I'm going again in May. I'll be going again in August.
Okay.
And it's also to retrain people who might be new, who didn't get the facilitation. And what the workforce loves about the facilitation is it's also good professional development. It teaches emotional intelligence and systems thinking.
Awesome. How important is systems thinking is to culture change?
So organizations operate, based on policies and resource realities and law and guidance. And that's, if we don't understand those things, but we're complaining about how they affect us, so we don't have that systems thinking, but we're going to complain about it and create negative messaging, there won't be a culture change.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. I definitely am in alignment with that. I think it's so important, and especially for people who are doing strategy. I know you also do strategic development. We've talked about that. And systems thinking is the only way to really get at your results, because if not, you can definitely divvy out things that different people or different parts of the organization have to do. But in the end, if they're not all working towards the same goal, they're actually working against each other, right? And so we want to make sure that that is part of the strategy, right? That is part of the culture, that we do work together, not just from a lens of different departments, but different cultures, bringing in the diversity, bringing up qualifications, doing that leadership development that leads to culture transformation. So thank you so much Chris for being here. Now, you're not off the hook yet.
Okay.
Right? Because it's time for our strategy round. And this is one of the things that we have been having the most fun with. So I'm going to throw some things out to you. You are going to tell me your thoughts on them right away. It may be true or false. And then I want you to just kind of go into a little bit more in depth for our audience. All right. So, true or false? A restructure will create a positive cultural transformation.
Absolutely not. False.
Okay. Tell us why.
Restructures are created by people and they're responded to by people. So how the collective responds to the restructure will determine whether it's successful. And there's one quote I'll leave you with in that: we're not products of our environment. We are products of how we respond to our environment.
Interesting.
The former is a myth. We are not products of our environment.
Awesome. All right. How about this? The squeaky wheel defines the culture.
The squeaky wheel defines the culture. No, the culture is defined by the collective. And as all the movements have shown us across the country, there are powerful wheels, a lot of them squeaky. They're not changing collective regard. They're not changing people's thoughts and feelings about things that they're happy to protest about, that they're happy to, and I don't say that pejoratively, some of them are necessary, quite frankly.
Sure.
So, but the squeaky wheel doesn't change them. In fact, it emboldens them. You're going to try to move, you're going to try to manipulate me, you're going to try to change me to someone I'm not. No, I want to be able to bring my authentic self.
All right. Just a few more. HR is solely responsible for cultural transformation.
False. And HR is part of the organization. They're part of the collective. So every time we give HR the keys to the culture kingdom, we are also hoping that the HR office has a healthy culture and that they're going to self-police and, their own organization. They are not responsible for the collective. They don't develop all the responses, but it's easy to point to them because they're the quote unquote human people. Well, leaders are supposed to be human people more than they're managers. But again, we promote people because they're technically proficient, but can't pick their folks out of a lineup, and that has to change. Very, very good. So what do you say? I want to kind of stress that a little bit. And the reason why is this is my audience. These are people who are dealing with this every day. I was brought in, they said, as a supervisor, right? But all they're really asking me for day to day is results. And they really don't care if I talk to my people because they just want those results. They either want an impact or they want the bottom line revenue to increase. So one of the things I was going to ask you next is, as a leader, you create culture. Is that true or false? And how can you do that when results are what your leaders are looking for? So it's false. Leaders don't define or determine the culture. There's always a collective regard. And in fact, before the leader comes in, workforce will be like, I don't know who they are, but they're not going to, tell me. They'll be gone before I. All that proves that leaders don't define or determine the culture. But that doesn't mean that they don't influence the culture. And if you're a leader, who's dealing with managers. I don't call them leaders, managers who are putting the mission before the people. If you're a leader dealing with managers, I think there's one of three choices. Choice one is don't take the job. And I don't mean that flippantly. Part of the message we need to send is we're only going to take a leadership job if you're going to let us lead. The second thing you can do, if it's something where you feel like you have to take it, particularly if you're in the government space, then one of the things you have to learn to do is to balance. You have to be able to tell your leaders, your senior leadership, I will make sure the mission gets done. How I get it done, please enable me to get there. And generally speaking, as long as you're not impeding mission, they won't care. That's not necessarily a good thing, but they won't care. So sometimes, I hate to say this, in very small instances, you have to just sort of push aside that indifference towards the people side because you're going to be the people focus. And then the third thing you do is you influence your workforce and empower and enable your workforce to know that you care about them and that you're going to watch their sixes and they'll take care of the mission. Well, how about that? People are good people. We always say most people come to work intending to do no harm. Why don't we actually believe it in practice? Trust your workforce, even if it means that you have a manager that you're having to sort of keep at bay.
Very, very good. All right. Corporate values or fringe benefits? Which one would you pick? Corporate values or fringe benefits?
Actually, this is going to sound crazy. I don't know what you mean by fringe benefits.
So corporate values would mean we work with integrity, we value trust, and fringe benefits would be I get a month off every year. I am paid for paternity leave, things like that. So what do you think is most important to advance a culture? Corporate values or fringe benefits? Hard, right?
It is hard because none of them are going to actually help a culture.
Interesting.
Well, because core values are, again, things that people say. That doesn't mean that that's what they follow. It also doesn't mean that that's what they respond to. Quite frankly, because culture is determined by the collective. If a CEO were to ask me that question, hey, I'm thinking about redoing our core values or extending our fringe benefits, I'd say the fringe benefits. Why? Because we have to realize that people are humans. They have needs, back to the sort of psychological, sociological factors. And I would say increase fringe benefits. Now, if the fringe benefits are only something that the C-suite gets or the sixth floor, then no dice.
Interesting. Okay.
Values are nice. They're important. I wouldn't spend more than an hour coming up with them. People spend millions of dollars on bumper stickers and strategies and things that don't mean anything to how people will respond to them, depending on whether they trust you and you trust them.
Awesome. All right. I have like 10 more, but I'm going to just do this last one. This has been such a great discussion. If it's true that leaders eat last and the captain goes down with the ship, where does that leave the workforce?
So I do believe it's true that real leaders, I did what you did, real leaders eat last. That the captain goes down the ship so that the workforce can focus on the mission. And let me put it into perspective. If I feel like I'm going to go down with the ship, then I'm always trying to figure out where's the ship at. Is it steering in the right direction? Or if I feel like I'm going to be eating last, I'm going to worry about my hunger. And what I'm not going to worry about is the mission. Leaders' jobs are to motivate, influence, and inspire people. And if you have a leaders eat last mentality and the captain goes down, you create security and you create a certainty, which any workforce needs. Those two things right there, certainty and security, are needed, back to that whole psychology, sociology reality.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So, Chris, one of the things that we like to do for our audience, of course, is to educate them. And I just want to thank you so much for being here and doing that with us today. This has definitely been a great education for me, but we don't want to leave them just with the education. We want to be able to offer them something where they can, one, get in touch with you. So let us know all of your information to get in touch with you. And is there anything that you might be able to offer to this audience to help them be change agents in their culture?
So absolutely. So several times a year, and it's every year like clockwork, I teach two classes around culture. One is how to facilitate culture change, and the second is how to assess culture and actually looking at root issues and all those things we talked about earlier, like what do I do when I go into organizations? And what I would offer specifically to the listeners of your show is 50% discount to any of those trainings, no expiration date. And I'll give the communication contact information, but the coupon code is very simple. It's all caps, motivator. So the word motivator in all caps.
Okay.
And my contact information again is chris@veritasculture.com. Reach out to me. I'll send you the links, any links you need on our webpage to the training. And there's no expiration date. And we teach these classes several times a year. So just for your students or just for your listeners.
Amazing. So 50% off, guys. That is like half of the class. Now, Chris, tell us, how long is the class?
So the facilitation class, which by the way is also a certification class, so you can get started, is 3 days, and the assessment class is 2 days, and they're two separate classes. But yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for offering that to our audience. And again, if you are a Strategic Motivator Show member, you will be able to get all of that information in the dashboard. You are going to not only be able to get that, but you are going to get the added bonus of a whole master class that Chris has brought to us. And that master class is going to teach you how to be more strategic, how to really up your culture. It's going to let you know what the pitfalls are, what the myths are. It's going to let you know what people are thinking and struggling with, so that you can actually be a great leader, right? We don't want to just be good leaders. We don't just want to be there, right? But we want to be really strategic leaders. And Chris has, I will tell you, I watched the masterclass. There are some great strategies there, and it's going to help you to think about culture in a way you've never thought about culture before. Now, as a strategist, this is the Strategic Motivator Show. One of the things I always like to think is, okay, which for lunch? Does culture eat strategy for lunch, or does strategy eat culture for lunch? Well, I'm going to say this. Without a strategy, you can't be successful. You guys know that's my whole theme. Whenever I go out and speak, I always say, in order to be successful, you must have a strategy. But I will absolutely say that your strategy, if it is not embedded in your culture, you will not see results or outcomes. So thank you so much, Chris, for being here. We really appreciate it. And we are so happy that you are helping us to help the world's leaders be more strategic. Have you enjoyed hearing from our guest strategist, Chris Armstrong? Then get the book that will help you identify and resolve concerns with organizational culture. Unmasking the Culture Culprit. Unmasking the Culture Culprit addresses common myths and symptomatic complaints that hang around the collective conscious. It tackles cultural archetypes and pitfalls of the negative culture cycle, and then discusses the inclusive, facilitative means by which to address all of those issues. Grab your copy today using the special link in the Strategic Motivator Show description box. Watching on YouTube? Make sure to like and subscribe.